Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Susanna Gurr and I'm the Managing Director at the BC Centre for Employment Excellence. Today's webinar is being co-hosted in partnership with the BC Career Development Association. BCCDA's mission is to advance the practice and professionalism of career practitioners in BC and to promote the highest quality of career development service to the public. For those of you who are not familiar with the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, it was created in 2012 with funding from the provincial and federal governments to act as a research and knowledge sharing organization for BC employment service providers and employers, and to conduct apply innovative research. We created this webinar series almost 3 years ago as a way to reach out and connect with practitioners. Through this series, we have highlighted new research by the Centre, but are also tapping into the knowledge and expertise within the employment services community. The webinars share best practices with BC practitioners and employers in order to better integrate evidence into practice. You are invited to view the video recordings from previous webinars that we have posted on our website. Today's guest presenter is Donna Lee. We're delighted to have her with us. Donna Lee will be exploring the intersection of hope and labor market realities. It looks at what is happening in the labor market to contribute to the loss of career hope among our clients and students and how to address this seemingly wicked problem. Using alternative futures theory, Donna Lee looks at the labor market trends through 4 lenses and skillfully interprets how these scenarios might serve as levers for clients, practitioners, and policymakers to bring hope back into the picture. Donna Lee is a senior consultant with the Canadian Career Development Foundation and has led a wide range of national, provincial, and territorial career and labor force development initiatives. She has worked with sector councils and employers to build career awareness, recruitment, retention, and skill development strategies in the petroleum, technology, nonprofit, government, and mining sectors. Like many of you, Donna Lee is passionate about the career development field and works to bring its potential to the labor market and workforce development goals of governments, employers, and communities. This presentation will last about 45 minutes. We want you to be engaged and encourage you to submit questions and comments to Donna Lee in the questions feature of your panel. My colleague Greg will facilitate a Q&A with Donna Lee after her presentation. Donna Lee is also officially our first guest speaker to deliver a webinar presentation using the Prezi format. Let us know what you think in the post-webinar survey. Remote CART or live closed captioning is also available during the webinar. You can find the link in the reminder email or the chat box in your panel. And now it's my pleasure to hand the microphone and screen over to Donna Lee.
Hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to be with you today, and I want to thank the BC Centre for Employment Excellence and the BC Career Development Association for inviting me to speak. I'm quite thrilled, and I do hope that trying out this new format works well, and so keep our fingers crossed. As Susanna said, I work for the Canadian Career Development Foundation, and CCDF is a project-based nonprofit social enterprise in Ottawa. And it's an organization that does not have any core funding. As I said, we are project-based, and so you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the work that we do, and it has taught me, having worked here for a number of years, it has taught me how to manage that uncertainty. And it has also been great for my career because I get to work on such a diverse portfolio of projects. And it's really that intersection between uncertainty and opportunity and being able to cope and thrive in that I wanted to talk to you today. although I've worked on a number of projects, everything from practitioner training to essential skills tool development, a common thread in the work that I do is looking at the employment outcomes of youth in Canada and what can be done to support better ones. And in my research of youth in transition for now almost 20 years, I've seen a lot of changes during this time. And in a nutshell, school to work transition challenges seems now more than ever to cut across youth much more broadly than ever before. Where once a university graduate was kind of protected, insulated, this seems to be less and less the case. And more youth seem to be at risk. And so while I've had this youth focus, I see, and perhaps you do too, that more and more clients of all ages are being challenged by the current labor market, which is, I suspect, is what is happening in terms of youth struggles from school to work transitions. And that we as practitioners are also being challenged by the changes in the labor market. So what I'm presenting today, I want to be perfectly honest, is a work in progress. I don't have this figured out. And I'm sharing these thoughts that I've had based on the research I've done as consideration for discussion. And I'm so happy that we'll have time for some question and answer later on. CCDF is in the midst of a research design project, which is really the foundation for this presentation. And it's looking at how to improve school to work transitions for youth in Canada. So while I will draw on this research for setting the stage of where my thinking is at, I do think that that this cuts across all client groups, and in trying to find the levers for change for improving employment outcomes for clients. So before I give you an outline of what I'd like to speak with today, I'd like to ask you some questions. And if all works well, we're going to do a little survey with you on this. So I want to ask how you are feeling about the future of career development. And Greg is going to put up a slide in a moment, but I'll just walk you through and consider whether you're more A, B, C, or D. So are you feeling completely optimistic about a person's ability to grow their careers throughout their lifetime? Have you given up hope and think that the only way to develop careers is through luck? C, do you feel that most people are constrained in their career development and you think that we are losing some of our core values in the current labor market? Or D, are you welcoming the end of the 9-to-5 job because it means that people can work on multiple projects to create the, the career of their dreams? So Greg's going to open a poll for you to answer either A, B, C, or D. And I'm just going to give you a few moments to make your selection. So Greg, is that enough time?
Hi, Donnalee. I think we'll give about 10 more seconds, and then I'll close the poll, and we'll see the results.
Great, thank you. So if you haven't had a chance to enter your response, take a moment to do that if you can. And for those who've already responded and for those who are just about to respond, I invite you to kind of hold that response that you made throughout the presentation. And I'm going to ask you at the end of the presentation to note if there's been any shifts, or have you still feel the same way. So just remember how you responded to this poll.
Okay, so Donnalee, we have the results are in, and 31% of the audience chose response A. No one picked B.
Oh, that's nice.
38% chose C, and 31% again chose D. So fairly evenly split between A, C, and D.
Well, that's great because we still have a hopeful group, which is wonderful. Thanks for that, Greg. I will tell you that from my point of view, I can have all of these perspectives. I can choose A, B, C, D simultaneously, given the research I'm doing. And my struggle, and perhaps yours too, seems to be trying to pinpoint what exactly is happening in the labor market and what is the way forward for our clients and students. So to put these future feelings into context, I'd like to start off by setting the stage and look at the contradictions and trends in the labor market today. I'd like to introduce you to something called wicked problems and the alternative future theory, and then take that and discuss the implications of these theories on career development and the potential of them for possible levers of change for our clients, for our profession, and for policy development. And then I'll take some question and answers. So overall, when I look at the labor market, in terms of the research that's being published right now, there's just something isn't right. Something's not adding up in terms of our working life that is of significant global concern. And if you're like me and you read the headlines, it just doesn't make sense why jobs are remaining unfilled while unemployment rises. We hear endless debates. Do we have a skills gap? Do we have a skills mismatch? Neither or both. We see, or at least I'm seeing in the research and in the commentary, a bit of the blame game going on. For example, you hear Generation Y is too spoiled and expects too much. On the other hand, they're the most educated cohort in Canadian history working for free. We hear that governments are not producing the labor market information that people need to make good career decisions. And then on the other hand, there's others that say there's too much LMI out there to make career sense out of. Employers complain about the skill level of new hires, while training budgets are at an all-time low. And there are more billionaires now than at any point in history. And while at the same time that 45% of working adults are working in jobs with some level of precarity. So there's something not right going on. And I pulled this quote from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory because it seems to kind of express how I'm seeing the research and how others are reading the research. There's no earthly way of knowing which direction we are going. And this is not a surprise because the research isn't conclusive. Economists and labor market analysts are having difficulty explaining the changes. Just when we think that we've got a foothold on what is going on, it gives way to another and then another interpretation. This said, however, there are some core trends, and I wanted to present them to you to provide a context for when I talk about possible levers of change later on. And you may be familiar with them already, or these may be new to you. I will be drawing on the work of Tom Zizes for this section. He's a labor market analyst based in Toronto, and he talks about 4 major trends impacting careers today. He calls them technology, financialization, business practices, and the gig economy. So let me just give you these in a nutshell. So many of you, no doubt, are already familiar with the hourglass labor market. To recap, technological advances have resulted in the growth of knowledge sector jobs at the top that require post-secondary education. At the bottom, there's a growth of entry-level positions that don't require a PSC credential or significant work experience. And these jobs are harder to replace by technology because they require interpersonal skills. Think of the barista that makes your latte to your exact specifications when you get up to the counter. Now there's a constriction in the middle of the hourglass, and these are middle skill jobs. These jobs require work experience, but not necessarily a post-secondary degree or diploma. And they have been shrinking due to outsourcing, computerization, and the reduction of the manufacturing sector. A travel agent is a good example. This person has been largely replaced by accessible websites that allow us to easily book our own travel. But there is much research suggesting that a further shift is going on. Now, you can argue that technology has been displacing workers since the Stone Age, but in fact, its aggregate result historically has been to increase jobs, not decrease them. For example, during the Industrial Revolution, increases in automation displaced some workers, but tended to create the need for more. For example, with the invention of the cotton gin, which was an automatic cloth maker, this reduced the need for cloth weavers. And as a result, cloth became much cheaper and people began buying more clothes. And this all it meant, all of a sudden, there was increased demand for designers, seamstresses, tailors, sales clerks, etc., etc. But recently, technology has begun to replace not just the routine functions, say, of a cloth weaver, but also the non-routine jobs. So for example, there is a new technology called the CpEEBC system, which is a scanning device that automatically diagnoses breast cancer and predicts survival rates exactly the way that pathologists do, only it does it better. We are also moments away from self-driving cars. So Eric Brian Yolson and Andrew McAfee, two professors from MIT, they have been arguing that exactly this, the improved supercomputers and robotics are largely behind the sluggish employment growth for the last 10 to 15 years. And you can see this exemplified here. In the Instagram example, what it means is that profit is shared by fewer and fewer. Historically, we see we always saw productivity and employment very closely linked. But since 2000, increases in productivity no longer parallel increases in job creation. So going back to the hourglass, while middle-level jobs have been shrinking because of technology, it seems that new technologies may also be starting to take aim at the top and the bottom of the hourglass, reducing the number of workers needed there too. The next trend that Tom talks about is financialization. And you'll note how these four trends and their consequences blend. Some argue that instead of focusing on how to best deliver services and create quality products, companies are increasingly focused on how to get profits up quickly for their shareholders. Increasingly, the prime obligation and driver behind business decisions seems to be providing the best return to shareholders over the shortest return period. In the race to post the best financial returns, the prediction of market analysts often shapes business decisions rather than the other way around, and the short-term bottom line trumps long-term vision, productivity, and sustainability. The push for quick return on investment results in downsizing and outsourcing, and again, wealth is held by fewer and fewer highly mobile CEOs. And obviously, there's a link to business practices. So in a nutshell, many businesses are doing business with contract workers, just-in-time workforce, holding on to short-term market view rather than the long-term sustainability view. And this has led to reduced workplace training, reduced benefits for workers, increases in precarious work, and some would argue productivity. And in combination with advances in technology, this has led to the birth of one really ugly baby, or also what's known as the gig economy. Probably the most well-known companies in the gig economy are Uber and Airbnb. There are also companies in this sector like TaskRabbit, Freelancer, and ClickWorker. The gig economy is an environment in which temporary positions are common and organizations contract with independent workers for short-term engagement. Here, the employer-employee relationship is circumvented with piecemeal work being contracted not by the hour or the day, but by the minute. Instead of a per diem, we now have a per minutus. It's convenient and hip, and it can work well for a select number of workers, those who want a lot of flexibility and those who have highly desired skills. But Tom argues that in fact it shares many of the elements seen in more informal emerging economies where workers struggle to cobble together a living wage without the protection of employment standards or stability. It weirdly is taking us back to the industrial age. We have spent over 100 years trying to build decent employment practices, and the gig economy threatens to dismantle it. So it's not a surprise that these trends are impacting hope. Sun Life Financial did a study of youth 18 to 24 and found that 90% feel excessive, not just stress, but excessive stress about their future. And to be quite honest, I get disillusioned when I look at these trends. It's made me think about the role of hope and perhaps the role of false hope in our practice in a time of such turbulent, constrained, and inequitable labor market reality. And here's where my future feeling, where I'm getting closer to answering B. Seeking advice, I mentioned my struggle to see a solution for improving labor market outcomes in the context of these trends to Tom. And he quipped back, "Oh, you should look up the work on wicked problems," as if this was going to cheer me up. Now, granted, Tom may not be a counselor, but I do value his suggestions. So I looked up this theory, and I'd like to share it with you. Wicked problems are exactly that. They're wicked. The definition is a wicked problem is a social or cultural problem that is difficult or impossible to fix for as many as 4 reasons. Incomplete or contradictory knowledge, the number of people and opinions involved, the large economic burden, the interconnected nature of these problems with other problems. And reading this does not supply a lot of hope, because I thought about our recent research on youth and underemployment, and it seems to me that not only do we have a problem, we might just have one that's wicked. Now, the hope comes when you take a look at who's addressing wicked problems. And you might have guessed that a lot of social activists for sure are working on those, but maybe more surprisingly would be folks like entrepreneurs that switch to being social entrepreneurs, industrial designers, and engineers. They are applying what they learn from their design work to social problems. And so they've contributed to this theory about really what they are trying to do. And so those working on wicked problems focus on improving the situation rather than trying to solve it. They know that one approach isn't going to resolve this issue. They don't see others working on the situation as competition. They see them as partners in the solution. They welcome collaboration, but will move forward independently if needed. They employ quite readily a trial and error approach to the situation to address it, much like entrepreneurs do. And they develop with and not for a particular population. Empathy is as the core of the folks who are working on wicked problems. So with this in mind, and in mind to push the envelope a bit, I started looking for new and innovative ideas as a place to start looking for the levers of change. And interestingly, what caught my eye was quite apart from anything in the career development field, because it isn't in the career development field, and it challenges the quote of Yogi Berra. The future is what it used to be. Academic Jim Dater from the University of Hawaii's Research Center for Future Studies had a question about how we see the future. Is it different today, or is our thinking about the future always stayed the same over time? To answer this question, he collected and analyzed thousands of documents from the recording of human history to today that refer to what the future might be. He collected works from all disciplines, from economics, from political science, from science fiction, art, and movies. And basically, he found that we tell the same stories, or he calls them archetypal future scenarios, over and over. And it doesn't really matter if you're an economist or an author of fiction, the stories at their core are the same. And so these archetypes he has described as the first one being continued growth. So if we put an economic lens on this, he would say that what this story tells is that a vibrant economy will keep growing forever. And this is the speak of many governments and financial institutions. Secondly, his second archetype is the collapse. And you know, what you think of in terms of the collapse is the apocalypse is one example. You can think of the movie Wall-E, you can think of the Ice Age, an earthquake, a tsunami, a giant fire-breathing lizard in Tokyo. In this story, a collapse is so significant that it dramatically disrupts a way of living. His third archetype he calls constraint, where continued growth is actually undesired. There is a view that our core values are at risk when the economy keeps growing. And this story sees the need to have our values renewed. And so you can see this in a consumer focus on fair trade products, the 100-mile diet, the Occupy movement, and the narrative of Bernie Sanders most recently in his campaign all tell this story. And lastly, the last archetype is called transformation, and it focuses on the transforming power of technology. We see this story in science fiction around artificial intelligence, cyborgs, RoboCop, and in thinking about cars that will drive themselves. Importantly, in Daters' work, he argues that no one scenario is better than another. There's no worst-case scenario, and you may argue that the apocalypse sounds pretty bad. Dater reminds us that there is always, if not more, work to do in a disaster, even if we wish that none of that would happen. He also says that no one scenario will happen more than any other scenario. And in many cases, aspects of all scenarios will happen in some form simultaneously. And you can certainly see that in the labor market today. Now, Dr. Dater's work was expanded upon by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Institute for the Future in a paper called The Future of Youth Employment. And they use Daters Archetypes to explore youth employment and look at moving forward towards levers of change that can support youth through developing their careers no matter what the future scenario holds. So I just want to go through their work on this. So they took Daters' archetype of the continued growth scenario and retitled it the flexing economy. And in this scenario, increasing competition and automation force workers to continually upgrade skills or risk losing out on opportunities. So it also is characterized by the fact that business continue to be lean to stay nimble. There is the explosion of the gig economy. Skills become more important than credentials in this scenario. The student loan bubble bursts, online education grows, and the 4-year degree is questioned. The job market is abundant with opportunities, but not full-time jobs, and workforce fills with entrants that have a combination of courseware credentials, conventional high education certificates, and a portfolio of projects to demonstrate competencies. And we saw this in a recent Harvard Business Review. They published a report called Projects Are the New Job Interviews. This was in May 2012. And they really say that many organizations are now hiring young people to take on smaller projects so that they can see how they interact with the organization before pursuing and moving forward with a full-time contract. The next scenario they've retitled From the Collapse to the Growing Gap. And of course, remember that this is the more apocalyptic scenario. And they interpret it as where automation reduces both low and high skilled jobs, causing fewer winners and many losers in the economic social divide. They see the growth of a permanent underclass. Governance is in crisis as it struggles to address the need in a systematic way. The informal economy and alternative currencies grow, and more post-secondary students find their degrees unmarketable, as characterized by this comic. And interesting, when I found this comic, I had also just read interviews with young people who have, at least anecdotally, we are seeing questioning the university education in Canada. The third archetype of constraint is retitled A Return to Values. And I must say that here I've really quite interjected my own thinking around this archetype. The Rockefeller Center had a different interpretation, and I thought that really what I was seeing in many ways, at least in different pockets and different communities across the country, was this real desire to return to a simpler way of doing things, one that is rooted in values. And so within this scenario, the economy remains sluggish, and many are eschewing the constancy of growth. Employers focus on efficiency, but consumers focus on the ethics of purchase and quality rather than quantity. And in this scenario, we see small, local, and collaboration are the buzzwords. Use of technology to small, local, collaborative ventures. We see the explosion of social entrepreneurship. Think about the Me to We movement. Problem solving becomes a key skill to have, and small entrepreneurial ventures with social responsibility in mind expand to bigger markets. And in Ontario, this may not be the case in BC, but in Ontario there has been an explosion of craft breweries, very small mom and pop shops, and they have just been allowed to sell their beer in a grocery store, which has been applauded by beer lovers here in Ontario as a big development. So that's an example of this archetype coming to fruition. Lastly, they interpreted the archetype of transformation as the amplified individual. And here, technologies that were once only available to large organizations are now available to individuals and empower them to create single-person companies and ventures. Individuals have the power to outsource work they obtain. And that's more characterizations of this archetype is that coordination software allows more work to get done outside of large organizations. Capital for business ventures flows freely from crowdfunding, banks, and venture capital. Entrepreneurial platforms such as Etsy are open to everyone in every income bracket. And the power balance shifts from large organizations to individuals, as exemplified in this CNN report of a US programmer who outsources his own job to China and surfs cat videos. Parts of all of these scenarios are happening today, and as I thought about them, I thought about what are the implications for individuals developing their careers. What do they need to know? What do they need to be able to do to find meaningful work across all of these scenarios? And importantly, what are the implications for us as practitioners and for us as policymakers? And through my research, I compiled a list of strategies that I think hook in to to developing careers across all of these scenarios. And I see them as the levers for change for individuals, for us as practitioners, for policymakers, to help us cope and thrive in these scenarios. So for individuals, many things will fit with what you are already doing to support your clients. Some will have a new edge and some will be new. Really, clients need to be tapped into, and so do we, where future work areas of growth and decline are. We need to be able to research a variety of learning options. We need to start thinking about competency development, not so much about credential accumulation. I know that we've talked about this for a while, but we need to have a portfolio, and we need to be able to record the competencies developed in each project that clients participate in. We need to see projects as the new interview. Clients need to be able to learn to manage their careers like a business. Financial management skills become a core skill as clients need to support themselves through the ebbs and flows of a more precarious labor market. In that, project management skills become essential skills. Mentorship is a critical component in career success, and we need to think like an entrepreneur even if we're not one. And to that, we need to be familiar with, if not able to use, gig economy tools. Youth may be already very familiar with these tools, but they may not have thought about them in the context of their career development. For career development practitioners, a background in marketing and entrepreneurship will support clients in using best practice strategies for their own self-marketing and career development. This will extend beyond what we currently do. We will need to get quite savvy about marketing in order to support our clients, especially if the amplified individual scenario grows. We need to help clients map career paths responsive to labor market realities across all 4 scenarios. We need to coach clients through looking at their preferred future through each scenario to support them in responding to each. Workforce development and partnership building become core competencies. We need to get out of the office and develop a working alliance with employers. We need to find out the skills they need and their expectations around demonstration of these skills. We need to coach clients to enhance their digital footprint and to demonstrate their project records to supplement traditional job-seeking tools. This is more than making sure incriminating pictures are off the internet. This is actually supporting clients to demonstrate their competencies and social media marketing profile online. We need to think locally and globally when coaching clients to access work opportunities. More and more, our clients are going to need to have multiple simultaneous jobs that are accessible both in the community and globally. We need to be aware of both avenues to support our clients to find these opportunities. We also need to teach clients and students how to find and even perhaps hire and manage through work in online labor markets. We need to connect disadvantaged clients with role models and mentors to help them build skills and investigate entrepreneurship. And increasingly, we'll need to know where clients can access wraparound supports and to advocate for those supports in our community. I truly believe that advocacy may be our most important skill in the future. And lastly, consideration for policy. We need to subsidize the cost of entry-level employment specifically for multi-barriered clients. We need to give companies incentives to develop and upload online courses as a tool for finding and promoting workers. We need to promote employer acceptance of alternative credentialing. We need to promote and fund the use of big data to highlight skill gaps in communities. We need to compel employers to designate time for employees for upskilling. We need to reconstitute organized labor to support wage and protect jobs. We need to consider policies around universal guaranteed minimum income. We need to improve career education in schools and start earlier. We need to promote worker collectives and employee ownership, and we need to make micro loans available to low-income entrepreneurs. And we need to push entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial ways of thinking in school. Going back to hope. I took this picture when I was in New York in December last year because I liked the statue, but I also liked the boys having their picture taken with it. They seem to really embody this message. This statue was near the Rockefeller Center, and the day I took it, the whole area's internet went down. Yes, technology does fail us. Talk about perhaps not a wicked, but a pretty big problem. The prime shopping district in New York and the net goes down 2 weeks before Christmas. I was shopping at one store and the clerks needed to record every sale by hand, filling out an amazingly lengthy transaction form. And for those who remember it, the chit-chit machine for taking credit card sales. Tell me how thrilled Christmas shoppers were to stand even longer in line to make their purchases. I was amazed by how non-pulse the clerks were. They even, I'm not sure they were, but they seemed happy about it. They treated it as a challenge to get energized about. They sang, they joked, they tried harder to serve you better. And their attitudes started to shift the attitudes of the customers in line. Now, I'll say some gave up and walked away, but most stayed in line. And even some started to help. They started wrapping up their purchases while the clerk processed the payment. Now, forgive me if I'm being Pollyannish, but I think in some ways our attitude towards the problem that count. In the conclusion of the book, The Second Machine Age, the authors Brian Yulfson and McAfee quote Scrooge in a Dickens' A Christmas Carol, who asks the ghost of Christmas future, "Is this what must be or what might be?" For these authors, they think the latter. Technology, they argue, creates possibilities, possibilities and potential. But ultimately, the future we get will depend on the choices we make. There is no doubt that to address the multiple issues that the current labor market trend is having on careers will require a multitude of individual and collective responses, for which I personally think that the career development field is well positioned to actively take part. So taking a page from the folks looking at wicked problems, I challenge you to find a point at which you want to improve the situation that is a little bit different from what we have been doing thus far. Think like an entrepreneur, or ask one how they would approach it. Ask those working on parallel projects, such as those in the mental health field, how they approach social change, and see what you can adapt. There is a cause for optimism even when we feel we are going to hell in a handcart. Whatever the future holds, we need to keep reminding ourselves of the values that we hold dear. And as you think about the questions I asked at the beginning of the webinar and how you think you are feeling now or still about the future, I'll end with two quotes, one from science fiction writer Ursula Le Guin. She says, "We live in a time of ultra-capitalism that often seems inescapable. Well, so did the divine right of kings." And lastly, I leave you with a quote from Martin Luther King, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Thank you very much, and I hope that you've enjoyed this webinar.
Thank you, Donna Lee. We have a quiet group today, so I'm going to take a moment to encourage folks to send in any questions that they have. We did have a couple of comments come in, so I'm just going to read one of those comments. We have an individual who says that when it comes to reaching a ceiling, it's not only technology, but fewer resources that put real limits to growth. So going back to those four options, option D is not only there, but also probably the only one left, as people will have to start looking back to essentials such as producing locally. So just a comment about those four different that you mentioned.
Yes.
Can you add to that?
Can you repeat the first line again?
Sure. The person says, "The issue of our times is complex. We have reached a ceiling. It is not only technology, but fewer resources, plus that makes real limits to growth."
Yeah, that is absolutely true, and yeah, thank you for that addition. And it's really quite interesting. You see quite a dichotomy between that need to have continued growth, and then sort of a reaction to that, where I don't know if this is happening in BC, but certainly in Ontario, we see even along the strip of where my office is, that a number of young people have pulled together. They have pop-up shops. They work together quite to bring in local cloth. They're making their own clothes. They're really going back to developing quite interesting entrepreneurial, almost social entrepreneurial pursuits, and I wonder to what extent we talk to young people about those being a career option for them, and I think that a lot of young people are really experimenting. It's a very exciting time. They are experimenting with a different view of what making a livelihood really means. So thank you for that comment.
Okay, and the same individual does has some very positive feedback for the presentation, says it was excellent, and is asking if you thought about presenting here in BC at the BC CDA conference. And interestingly, it was actually at the Connexus conference that you presented this, and that's how we discovered it. So you have presented it at a career development conference, but it was over in the eastern part of Canada. So it sounds like there's an invitation to come in person, and maybe in a year or so, when you further develop the content to present here in BC, if you're able to.
I would love that, and you wouldn't have to twist my arm very hard.
Excellent. So we do have a couple more questions. One, someone's asking how, this is just a difficult question, how could I motivate a senior who is not computer literate to ride the wave of technology and change when he or she is not hopeful nor happy with all of the changes that we are observing in the world?
Oh, wow. It's difficult to say without being connected with that person. Now, I'm assuming a senior is meaning senior citizen?
I assume so, yeah.
And so if I answered that this way, I can say that for a personal example, my mother would fit exactly in that regard. And recently she has just exploded in terms of being really open to technology. And I think it really depends on where your client is, and trying to find out really what the resistance is to learning that skill. And if you can hook into something that would allow them to, whether it's receive emails from a grandchild, or having that kind of connector, which in my mother's case was really, she really wanted to get on Facebook so that she could friend her grandchildren and find out, what they're up to, and that was really a nice hook in. So trying to find, what the resistance is about, and trying to find the hook that might, as I would say, come around the back door of that, to see if you can foster some willingness to learn that skill.
Great advice, thank you. We have a couple of folks asking about accessing the presentation, so I'm just letting people know that we will post the link to the Prezi presentation both on our blog with the video, as well as in the follow-up email. And we have one more question. Someone was asking are you aware, Donnalee, if anyone has ever taken this approach of layering, I guess you could say, the traditional knowledge in this area with the 4 points? So I think she's referring to the alternative futures theory. Is this the first time that that's been looked at together?
As far as I know, that the only organization that has played with Dr. Daters' work is the Rockefeller Foundation, in that, I'll just try and find it quickly. If you Google Hang on a second. I'll be right with you. Hang on. Oh, geez, I'm not finding it very quickly, but I can certainly send when you send out a link to the participants. I can send that paper from the Rockefeller Center.
That would be great.
Excuse me. Other than that, I don't know. And what I loved about that idea is that it got us away from thinking that the future is one thing rather than multiple things. And it, for me, felt more hopeful that we could start to see it as not just going in one direction, but in multiple directions. And then it just felt to me that it opened us up to different ways of navigating and also different ways of coping with whatever the future may hold. And also there was a nice reassurance that, you know, we tell the story over and over and over again, so this must be really rooted in who we are as human beings. And so it's kind of a nice scenario to play with. But other than that, other than myself and the Rockefeller Foundation, I don't know anybody else who's playing with this.
Okay. Well, we've reached the end of the hour, and we don't have any more questions coming in. So I think we'll wrap it up here. So, Donnalee, we just want to thank you again for your presentation today, and thanks to everyone out there for attending. Today's session was recorded, and we will post the video of the presentation along with closed captioning on our website and send you all the link in an email within the next week. As always, we welcome your input and feedback. When you leave the webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. We would appreciate if you took a minute or two to share your thoughts. It will help us immensely in planning future events. We would also appreciate any suggestions you have for future webinar topics. April's webinar will be announced shortly, so stay tuned to the website and newsletter for more information. So again, that ends our webinar today. On behalf of Donna Lee, my colleagues here at the Center, and as well as at the BC Career Development Association, thank you all for participating in today's discussion, and have a great afternoon.